Today we were going to talk about the amazing digital circus and the final, episode of it. So there will be spoilers if you haven't seen it yet. Um, I personally wasn't a big fan of the digital circus until the very last episode. And that did a lot for me because I usually just watch shorts and fan animations. And for some reason, because of the absolute hype that went over the last episode, I couldn't help but watch it. And so forth. I've watched a few episodes here and there. I wouldn't say that I'm necessarily a big part of the fandom, because I don't really talk much about any of the characters, except for maybe Zoopal and Jax. And I guess you could say that's a little on character for me because I'm queer myself. And a lot of people got into arguments about Jax in particular, about how they were trans, about how there was no signs despite them covering their chest when they got peeled, and the egg joke, the maid dress. And I've also noticed that Jax, majority of the time in the circus, they were surrounded by feminine presenting people, or just people who just straight up identified as women. And I can't imagine how dysphoric that must have been. Because even you've seen Jax's room, it's pink and frilly and girly. Stereotypical girly. And that must have been so horrible for them to be so surrounded by people, except for Kinger and Kane. But Kinger's not all the way there majority of the time. And Kane is Kane. Kane's just Kane. And if I had lived a life like that, being in a room surrounded by things that reminded me that I wasn't aligning with the body I was in. And technically you could argue everyone was in a body they weren't used to, because they weren't in their human forms anymore. But at the same time, Jax's human counterpart, their name is Lee. And for so far we know, Lee doesn't know they're trans. Or, they haven't gotten there in life. Jax was in the circus probably thinking about that for so long. Because imagine feeling that way. Being in a room that resembles something you can't reach. Being surrounded by people with bodies that you wish you had. And then you don't have much to think about other than adventures. Because they basically isolated themselves. And the bow on their head that Ribbit gave them, I firmly believe that if Kaufmo didn't come through, that Jax and Ribbit probably would have, gotten closer and closer and maybe become a couple. And I feel like through Ribbit's support, Jax would have probably, found a way to make themselves more feminine presenting. But they just kept cutting people off because they were afraid of being hurt. And I know people are gonna be like, well, Jax is a jerk. They did terrible things. Which I agree with, but at the same time, I understand why they're a jerk. In my opinion, you should look at the cookie as a whole to understand why they are the way they are. You shouldn't excuse their actions, but you should have enough sympathy to figure out, oh, that's the reason why they're like that. Because reminder, before Jax went to the circus, they thought they killed their own mother. And they never really had a dad around. What was it? They had an argument with their mother before, they pushed her. And it was they opened up to their mom, and their mom basically laughed in their face and then hugged them, which probably did a lot of psychological damage to them. Because when someone is, because your parents, when you're a child, you are told that your parents are supposed to love you more than anyone else. They're supposed to support you more than anyone else. They're supposed to be there for you no matter what. And to go through something like that is horrendous. And then, like, Jax only got close to one dude, and that was Kaufmo, and Kaufmo's gone. We saw the scene of him, them crying their eyes out. And that's crazy to me. That despite all that, there are still people that hate Jax. Because it doesn't take much sympathy to understand where Jax is coming from with how they feel. And I kind of expected Jax to abstract when that one scene in the bathroom. And it just been kind of slowly building up. Because they were isolating. And if it wasn't for Pomni coming in and trying to friend Jax, then Jax probably would have abstracted way sooner. Because despite him trying to be like, oh, I'm the jerk, I'm the funny character, I'm, the comic relief, they were suffering. They felt like they didn't belong. And I know some people said, oh, Ragatha's gonna abstract, Gangle's gonna abstract. And I also understand why Gangle reacted the way that they did when Jack abstracted, because they said they couldn't cry for them. And I understand. They got their name from Jax. They were never treated right from Jax. They were insulted by Jax. And then in that one flashback, Jax is wearing the maid outfit again. And basically straight up flirting with Gangle. And when Gangle abstracts, in that one flashback, Zupo's just like really comically mad. And it's like kind of funny, which is weird. Because Gangle, despite her being very depressing, was the thing that made all the scenarios feel more human because of how expressive they were. I was not a big fan of the Amazing Digital Circus, but also makes me not want to be a fan more when I talk about the fandom, because they basically scared the creator out of their own fandom. How do you do that, dog? You scared the person who was making the content for you, and you were just like, you know what, we don't like you. And then people were complaining that it was basically just Jax and Pomni. And that's probably because, despite, a lot of the other characters having trauma, we don't know much about Zubul. We understand that they, were a bartender at some point and that they feel a little weird with their own body. We learn about Gangle, how they used to work in fast food, and how they do art, and how they're a bit, emotional. We understand that Ragatha was from a rich family. Her mother wasn't the greatest to her. Mommy issues. We don't know much about Pomni, despite her being basically the main character, other than she basically went through haunted houses on her free time and that she was an office worker. I feel like the most lore we got from someone was Jax. We understand that Kinger was one of the people that developed the AI in the circus that they're in. He has a wife, Queenie. They have kids IRL, in the real world. And it just genuinely surprises me that there wasn't more lore baked into the episodes. Not to, be mean to Glitch or Gooseworks, but I feel like the person we knew more about than anyone else was Jax. And it kind of feels like them abstracting at the end made a lot of sense. They were self-destructive, they were passive-aggressive, they were distancing themselves from everyone. And the two people that they got close with when they joined the circus were gone. They basically lost all their foundation. And the moment that Kaufmo was gone, we saw how bad Jax got. And if it wasn't for Pomni trying to get close to Jax, Jax probably would have abstracted way sooner. And I know I said that already, but I want to make that point. Because Pomni was the main thing anchoring Jax. making Jax feel like they were worth something, like they were human again. And Ragatha, despite everything, it felt like Ragatha was very against Jax and Pomni being friends. She legit said, "You're going to corrupt her." And hearing someone say that, because at one point, Ragatha said that them and Jax were friends. Hearing someone you used to call a friend, and in some, of the flashbacks, flashbacks to alternate universes, when Ragatha died, Jax became, died, abstracted. Jax became way more malicious. And it's like all the empathy and sympathy and emotions were just gone, other than I'm going to do what I want. Because it's like that part of him died. And I firmly believe at some point that Jax saw Ragatha like his mom. She was smart, she was funny, she was kind. And I know this is a little bit like unlore, but like the mom friend, because it's true. Ragatha was probably a lot like a mom to Jax. And now that Jax is gone, and there has been a little few things of, Jax being the abstraction blob and the dark tent being so cute. It's hard to believe that that's the end. That a character that pretty hated, but also pretty loved by the community. I'm pretty sure it's a good 50-50 split about how people feel about them. It was an ending that I know for a fact a lot of people wouldn't be okay with. A lot of people are like, no, bring Jax back, because it's hard to get attached to a character for them to be taken away. And it kind of makes me sad because, all the other abstractions, their lives didn't get shown to us. The only lives we did see were of the main cast. Their real life and what had happened. And despite everything, and there's a lot of good things that happened to their IRL, Zoopal starting a bar, Gangle making art their full thing, Kinger and Queenie still being married and having their IRL kids. Jax going to Zoopal's bar. Who knows, maybe they're friends in the human world, despite them hating each other in the digital circus. But Jack's abstraction being with Ribbit and Kaufmo again makes a lot of sense to me. We didn't see that much lore with Kaufmo and Jax's friends. We saw them laughing here and there, but we got a lot more lore with him and Ribbit. Them and Ribbit. And how they felt with Ribbit. Because it was very obvious that for the first time since Jax has been in the circus, that they found someone to anchor onto. Other than, later on Pomni. And I guess that scared them because, they got attached, not really attached, got, more honest with their mother, they were treated with ridicule. And that stuff sticks to you. You kind of think, well, if the person who's supposed to love and care for me more than anyone else won't do that, why would anyone else? Alright. And I also kind of like that Kane gave the circus away to the people and was just like, do what you want. I'm sorry. Because at least now they can kind of, I don't know, control more of what their lives were like. Maybe get a little happier. But at the same time, it's kind of a dreadful feeling. Knowing that that's it. You can't escape to the real world because you're brain scanned. And sure, you can change bits and pieces of that world, but it's never going to be the same. And so far, unless more information gets, put in, we don't know if more people can join the circus now or not. And if that's the main cast forever now, or if, there's going to be a really big argument at some point, someone else abstracts, because, you know, the last abstraction that we will ever know of is Jax. Unless for some reason, like in a year or two, Glitz releases an episode from the Amazing Digital Circus, and it's gonna be like the Amazing Digital Circus final cut, and it's like the Digital Circus getting completely shut down, and they just get erased. I don't know, man. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. This avatar is called Noms by Novapie, and I hope you have a very good day.